Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for coming and welcome. I appreciate not only your coming, your presence here tonight and your presence watching at home, but your attention to town matters. It's much appreciated. I have a few announcements and then a few remarks about the budget. And then I'll introduce our town manager to present the budget, and looking forward to hearing all your questions. Let's see, announcement number 1. The purpose of this meeting is to provide clarifying information to answer questions. It is not a meeting to debate or advocate. If I hear you slipping into advocacy, be forewarned, I will interrupt you. There is a Robert's Rules tutorial recording on the town website that you may want to visit before Tuesday's meeting. The special RTM will be held on Tuesday, May 27th, in the BUHS gym, beginning at 6:30. Please plan to eat before attending, as there will be no food provided. And lastly, dependent care stipends are available through the town manager's office for both this info session as well as special RTM. So, thank you. And I have a few remarks that are actually a summary of the remarks in the budget report that you all is online and you can receive, and I assume it's in the back of the room.
Yep.
Very good. All right. So, we are here as required by the March RTM vote. The Select Board has brought a May 1st, 2025 fiscal year 26 budget for your consideration. We conducted a series of meetings in the month of April. These meetings offered ample opportunity for public input and for examination of the elements of the municipal government. The fruits of these discussions are reflected in the May 1st, 2026 budget. We saw in real time through 8 meetings how difficult it is to cut the budget. But cut we did broadly and mostly across the board. The May 1 FY26 budget is a very lean municipal budget. The Select Board and our professional staff analyzed our finances and produced this May 1 budget. This review, conducted by our town manager and a new financial team, adjusted the budget both up and down. There was a thorough re-examination of the budget between March and April. And this examination catched overestimates and underestimates. The town manager's budget report details items that were underestimated and now corrected with a net increase to the budget. We are now in a better position to project accurate budgets, both for this FY26 budget, the future FY27 budget, and both short-term and long-term budget projections. Another addition to the budget, rather than a subtraction, was adding new firefighters. This will be discussed in the town manager's remarks. Also, Brattleboro values its town staff, and they are dedicated to working on our behalf. But as we all know, staff salary and benefits are the major portion of our budget. Because of the critical desire to reduce costs, the new proposed FY26 budget has cut positions and curtailed certain benefits for staff. Staff positions include an assistant town clerk, town manager, an IT coordinator, emergency service data specialist, emergency services dispatcher, an APAR finance clerk, the sustainability coordinator, and the finance director. Reductions in staff benefits include a reduction on the cost of living adjustment to 3% staff-wide, reducing non-union wage steps by 1%, elimination of vacation buybacks for department heads, reduced conferences and memberships organization-wide, and eliminated employee recognition and appreciation funds. In summary, the Brattleboro municipal budget has had many ups and downs. While we may find this May 1st FY26 budget disappointing, I believe that this budget provides basic municipal services for the town of Brattleboro in FY26. This budget increase for the median home amounts to $286 for the year, which is $24 a month. I look forward to continuing to work with the select board and the town professional staff and the people of Brattleboro to make the Brattleboro the best it can be. Ongoing budget discussions for FY27 will continue to be open and transparent. I trust RTM will understand the hard work and sincere resolve the select board and town staff has had to develop this May 1st FY26 budget, and will vote to pass the budget. Thank you very much. Let me now introduce our town manager, John Potter.
Thanks, Liz. Good evening, everybody. The select board has re-examined the FY26 general fund budget, and the result before you is a $24.9 million budget, which is a $1.9 million increase over the current fiscal year's allocation. And that is an 8.3% increase on the expenditures. As Liz mentioned, the select board deliberated 8 times since the last RTM. They had an organizing conversation on April 1st, a listening session at the Brooks Memorial Library on April 8th. Then on April 10th, the board scheduled out all the topics that it wanted to drill down into for re-examining the budget. They then considered the Finance Committee report, the structural budget issues on April 15th. They considered revenues, previous budget cuts and service reductions other than public safety on April 17th. And on April 22nd, they considered service reductions to public safety. And then finally, on April 24th, they considered solid waste and looked at preliminary budget numbers before adopting this new budget before you on May 1st. During their deliberations, the select board reviewed and confirmed over $843,000 in across 28 budget cuts that had been proposed by the last select board at the March, that was in the budget that you saw in March. That had things in it like cost of living allowance staff-wide being reduced to 3%, reducing all the department head and non-union wage steps by 1%, not hiring the emergency services data analyst, eliminating vacation buybacks from department heads, eliminating leaf collection, reducing the global warming solutions funding, and a bunch of other things that this board looked at in detail and reviewed and said, yes, we want to continue to have that in the budget. There was one exception, and I will talk about that in a minute. Then after they looked at all the cuts that the last board made, because there was some sense that maybe they didn't want to continue with those reductions, they looked at a list of about $1.1 million in reductions that the last select board considered, but said they didn't want to do those. And so they looked at those, then they looked at all of the services that the town staff do to try to locate services that they wanted to reduce in this new draft version of the budget for you. And then finally, they asked town staff to suggest additional reductions. And the totality of all of those 3 things was about $690,000 worth of reductions. And that included things like I'll just mention the big ones were eliminating the assistant town manager position, delaying intersection work, delaying replacement of police car 1, reducing the police dispatcher position to part-time, and downgrading the finance department clerk position, and a bunch of other things that were of smaller value but added up to around $690,000. So those were the kind of reduction policy decisions that this board made. Then they also looked at some increases or restorations into this budget, things that were important to them that they wanted to put back into the budget. And that included reserve contingency to start to build back the rainy day fund. And that was, it was only $10,000, but I think it was an important statement for them to make that they see the value in doing that and they want to try to be funding that. The one thing in the last select board's reductions that this board did not want to continue with was all of the town arts funding being reduced. So they partially restored that to about $10,000. So in this budget is $10,000 that's going to town arts funding. And then one of the things that they originally agreed on was continuing to reduce the bus service funding, but I think after further consideration, they decided that they wanted to restore that back in so that the bus service has its kind of level funded at $50,000 in this draft budget. And then the big thing that was an addition was the addition of 3 firefighters to reduce fire overtime. And the reason for that was, and that was about a $311,000 addition. And the reason for that was that this year we were seeing that our overtime in the fire department was running about $375,000 over budget for a lot of different reasons, which I'm happy to explain if people are interested. But generally, we are just having a lot of calls, and we're managing people on who are out on leave, and getting training and other things like that. And I'm sure the chief can speak to it as well. But anyhow, this $311,000 that gets put back into this budget will reduce our overtime costs by, I believe it's around $125,000 or $130,000 in the next fiscal year. So it actually saves the town money to do that because you're paying the firefighters straight time instead of double time, basically, overtime cost. The next thing that the board did that I wanted to call out was some revenue enhancements. So they had some good discussions about that, and they reset the business license fees to $100, and that will bring in an additional $50,000 in revenue. They also increased the library copier fees, outside revenue that the fire department generates, and recreation and parks facility use fees. So that was a total of about $72,000 in additional revenues in this proposed budget before you. They also talked about other revenue sources that they'd like to explore, but we didn't have enough information to put to speculate on what those would be in this budget. But it could be something that the board decides they want to enact and could actually generate revenue in FY26. And those were things like the sale of town land, short-term rental tax, charging for public Wi-Fi services, expanding our requests for payments in lieu of taxes, additional fees for cemetery plots, food truck rentals, and doing some sort of tiered business license fee. So I expect the board will want to be revisiting a lot of those things. And that may generate additional revenue in this proposed budget, but that would kind of accrue to the bottom line and could also help with that restoration of rainy day funds. So this budget is a plan. It's very challenging to make detailed and complicated estimates to put in a budget like 18 months before you're in the middle of spending it all. That's a super challenging thing for anybody to do, especially a budget of the complexity of the town of Brattleboro. However, as Liz mentioned, this redo of the budget allowed the staff to take a fresh look at the estimation assumptions that were made back in September and October of last year. And so the new information that we have in this proposed budget is a much more accurate picture of what we're likely to need to spend to deliver services next year. Overtime is one of those. It's notoriously difficult thing to predict. It's in the Public Works Department, it's really weather related. You can take a chance on that we'll have an easy winter and we may not spend hardly any overtime at all. Or we could have a more challenging winter like we did this last year and we end up using more overtime than we expected or would like to. The town, in public safety, the town has been seeing about a 5 to 10% increase in call volume every year. And because we haven't been increasing our FTEs to track that sort of growth, that means that it falls to overtime in a lot of cases, in particular like in the fire department's case this year and also in the police department. We've also been seeing a lot more time-consuming fire events and mutual aid requests where whenever we send an engine outside of Brattleboro, that costs us in overtime. But all the other mutual aid towns, of course, are coming here when the Sportsman's Lounge is burning down or there's a wildfire up in West Brattleboro, and so there's a trade-off there. And so basically the bottom line on estimating overtime is that we can underestimate overtime. That keeps the tax rate down, but it may not ultimately be realistic, and it's really like it's a risk management consideration. So what I did was I took the budget that's in here, and in this budget, I have a column that is what I labeled RTM1, and that's what was in the budget in March when you considered it last time. And then I took the new budget that this select board put together, and that's RTM2, and it's the shaded line. And what I did was I took the difference on those and I created this new column called change so that we could see and have a conversation about how it changed from March to May. And there's a table in my budget message for you that it weeded out all the ones that were under $1,000, and so it just took the bigger ones. And I put those all in here and in this chart to show like the net impact, because there was a lot of shifts in this budget that made sense to align our staff salaries with the benefits that were like kind of spread out in different lines. So there was a lot of things that moved around. So for example, like the health savings accounts payments and the health insurance, both of those were, we considered them overestimates in the last budget, so they went down by about $230,000 in total. Incentive pay went down by $69,000, but that just shifted over to salary lines. Same with educational incentives, vacation accrual, longevity, all those things were more appropriately put into the staff salary lines as opposed to having separate ones in the budget. So those were all considered overestimates, and they are reduced in this budget now. Life insurance was another. Also, like an example is we got the Windham County tax, the actual tax that we're going to have to pay. We now know what that will be, and it'll be $24,000 less than what we estimated back in September of last year. Then on the other side are what we consider underestimates in the last budget. So things that that we think now will actually be higher, that will cost more. And that is things like department head adjustments, and that is for things like if transportation costs were elsewhere in the budget, they got moved into staff salary, or if payouts for health care, for like not taking the health program, those got moved into some of those department head lines, as well as also in the staff salary lines. Also things like police outside overtime, the Vermont child care tax. So that is the tax that the state legislature put on towns and employers and employees, and that we have not had a union conversation about that, so that was plugged in. We now have that accounted for in this budget, but it was a $49,000 increase. Also, because of a lot of those shifts like that, shows us that our Social Security and employee retirement lines needed also to be increased. And so anyways, there's all these puts and takes across the budget. They're all spelled out line by line in here, but the totality of them is about 90,000 or so that it had to increase to capture all of that net impact. Then the other thing I just wanted to mention before we open it up for questions are some of the budget priorities that the select board is communicating or implying in these numbers that are in front of you in this spreadsheet. So these are things that they either stated or are evident from the decisions they made and some of the board members may want to speak to this as well, but for instance, they're setting a policy of maintaining a reserve fund that's 10% of the annual budget and want to achieve that incrementally over the next 10 to 15 years. I think it will be a shorter period than that, but they started with a $10,000 set aside in this budget. They also talked about producing a 5-year financial plan, a 5-year capital infrastructure plan, and a 25-year capital equipment replacement plan. Some of these things we already have, but they do need to be updated. And they would like to do that for the FY27 budget building, which will probably start very shortly. Another thing they communicated was they considered issuing cat licenses, and they decided to keep Brattleboro cats license free. So that is not going to happen after several discussions. The board found efficiencies, and a priority is to adjust expectations for reduced levels of service from the town manager's office, and that's the reduction of the assistant town manager position. They showed a priority of outsourcing information technology as well as financial management services. There are complex reasons for both of those. Happy to get into that more, but I think that was a decent amount of savings in the budget, despite our inability really to hire a finance director. I think that's the key one maybe to talk about. Then another priority was maintaining competitive pay for the department heads who took lower salaries to start with and are still progressing through their steps to reach the market rate, something that's comparable across other towns that we find as our competition for those roles. We also, another priority was reducing planning department services for community resilience programs, and as well as support for the energy and agricultural advisory committees. The final priorities that this budget reflects are likely policy shifts in winter road and sidewalk maintenance to reduce overtime costs, continuing to level fund the bus service, as I mentioned, and also maintaining significant funding still for the town arts fund. Those were priorities. And then finally, after a lot of conversation, there was a feeling to avoid any reductions in library hours or staffing. So all of these priorities are reflected in this budget. This budget also includes a projection for FY27. That was really all I had capacity to do, was to look out ahead 1 year. I plan for fiscal 27 to look out like 5 years, so that you can kind of see what the thought is about what's coming on the horizon. There will be other priorities, I'm sure, and other things that will come up during the FY27 process, but I think this gives us a good kind of a starter look at what we might expect next year. So this proposed budget will provide over 240 municipal services that people value and they rely on every day: road maintenance, plowing, fire and police protection, a great library, managing elections and meetings like this, recreation and planning, and lots of other things. And to fund all of these services, in this budget, property taxes would increase by 1.9 million, which is a 10.8% increase. That will result in an estimated tax rate of $1,610 per 100,000 of assessed value. And Liz mentioned what that means for the median home, which is $183,000 in Brattleboro. I also included in your budget packet a look at what it means for a home that is 50% of median, as well as a home that's 150% of median, or a home of 200% of median, which would be $366,000 assessed value. And that table shows the estimated increase for all of those types of homes. So hopefully some of you can see where you land in that. So just to wrap up, I think this revised FY26 budget addresses many, but I'm sure not all, of the concerns that were voiced at the representative town meeting in March. There was a renewed commitment here to structural integrity and long-term planning. There's a reduction in expenditure that's distributed across departments. A lot of the community services that people value have largely been maintained in this budget, but significant sacrifices have been made in two primary areas. Those are in capital spending and in the town manager's office. Those are both largely about risk management. Hopefully our infrastructure and equipment that was originally planned to be replaced in FY26 will hold up through another year. That's kind of what we're betting on, that they won't fail or require major maintenance that we didn't budget for. And then also, hopefully, you, the community, the select board, will be satisfied with the quality and the pace of town government that I'll be able to provide you absent high-level support in my office. So that's a kind of an overview of what's in this budget, and I think now, instead of going through it line by line, I would maybe suggest that we open it up for questions, or however you want to handle it.
Sure. Thank you very much, John. First, let me just ask my colleagues if anyone has something they'd like to say.
Yeah, I have a statement prepared, but maybe someone else does as well. Okay, go ahead. I'll go ahead. Before we begin, can you hear me?
Yep.
I will move my mic. How's that? You can tell I'm new, right? All right, before we begin, I would like to thank this body of RTM for the journey of redeveloping the fiscal year 26 budget. Though it wasn't easy, through it, we had the opportunity to listen and to see one another face to face, to fight for our beliefs, and to consider one another and the compromises that are part of living in a community together. I want to acknowledge the hours and toil of our department heads and our staff, and thank our town manager and town manager administrator, Jessica Stickler, for her fortitude, kindness, and for getting the work done. I want to thank our communications coordinator, Seth, for jumping right in where Patrick left off to run the Zoom sessions for our late night meetings. And above all, I'd like to thank the community of Brattleboro citizens and citizens of our region who stayed up until after 11 p.m. with us in the Select Board meeting room or on Zoom, many after work, whether it be in scrubs from working a shift at the hospital or working on a farm or at the office, members of our community who were not afraid to ask questions, who were not afraid to inform the Select Board of what was important to them. As a new Select Board member, I was inspired by the testimony of students in our community, of seniors, of business people, of bicyclists, of motorists, of activists, of pragmatists. We are all in this room together, and I thank you for your care and your service. And with all of these thanks, I sincerely hope that we pass the budget on Tuesday, May 27th. It is not a perfect budget, but let's work together to pass it and look forward to fiscal year 2027 budget to find more taxpayer savings and more long-term financial planning for our future of our town, Brattleboro, Vermont.
Thank you, Amanda. Anyone else? Yes, Oscar.
I think I'll have more to say about the budget itself on Tuesday, but I just like to acknowledge, like Amanda did, that this is an imperfect budget and that I've spoken to a lot of people I can see out there right now about specific concerns, things that could be better. I hear all that. I think what we have worked very hard to do in 4 or 5 weeks is to come up with the best compromise we can that lets us go forward for the next fiscal year. So that's why I voted for this budget when we finished it. There are things in it, decisions we made that I voted against, but that's part of what making a compromise is all about. So for tonight, I'm hoping that we can be informative and answer all your questions so you can make the best decision possible on Tuesday. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you all would like to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. Peter?
Sure. I voted for 2 budgets to pass them both, and I sincerely hope that this one, which, as you've all witnessed, double sessions last month, working hard, coming up, as Oscar said, with many compromises. Some of them we liked, some of them we didn't, but that's what it's all about. I have said this a few times, and I'll say it again tonight, that a lot of how budgets look moving forward is how we address revenue coming in. And that will be something that, for me personally, will be the thing that I focus on, and the way I see it, because we all know expenses aren't going down, things aren't going down, everything is trending up, it always has been. So how we mitigate that is through revenue. So that's going to be my commitment, at least for the next 2 years, and perhaps beyond, that I serve on this board, is trying to find ways to reduce tax burdens to everybody out there, everybody listening at home, is through finding revenue sources. So I just wanted to put that out there. And again, thank you all for talking to us and kind of wading through this. Some more patient than others, but we get it.
Thank you, Peter. Isaac?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your questions. Thanks.
All right, then. Let's begin.
And Seth has a microphone.
Oh, and Seth has a microphone, and there's one up here in the top of the aisle. Ronnie?
Hi, Ronnie Byrne, District 9. In keeping with Peter's comments about revenue sources, when I look at the paperwork that you guys put together, I was struck by the line that says, the state's GA motel program generated an estimated $544,000 in emergency response costs from the town. I'm wondering if somebody up there can talk to what sorts of efforts, if any, are being made to try and recoup the costs of that from either the state or the property owner, like I believe in Rutland, they are doing that. The town of Rutland is doing that with a fellow who owns hotels there. So I'm just wondering if the town is doing anything like that, and if so, where are we at?
Thank you, Ronnie. Let's divide that into two questions. I'm asking John to answer both, starting with the Rutland example and then the lobbying.
So Rutland does not, yeah. Rutland did do that. They no longer receive any payments for motels in the GA program. I believe the one motel that they did that at closed. They had leverage with that motel owner due to the conditions in their Act 250 permit, so they were able to use that leverage to get them into an agreement to pay the town directly. We don't believe we have that in any of the 6 motels that are in the program here in Brattleboro. We do 2 of them maybe, but that would take a jurisdictional opinion, and we don't have the capacity to go through that process at the moment. In the meantime, what our efforts have been on is trying to work in the legislature and with the legislative delegation to get some support from the state legislature for these costs. And you mentioned the 500, I think it's a little over 500,000 that we know cost us in 2024. We're projecting in this FY26 budget that if the rate of calls that are happening at those 6 motels continue at the same rate, it'll cost more like $600,000 in the FY26 budget for that response, both fire, EMS, and police. So one of the things I reported to the select board last night about is that I testified on Bill H 397, I think it is, last week about the local option tax distribution. So in this bill, the Senate Government Operations Committee was considering adjusting that distribution, which is currently 70% stays in town and 30% goes to the state. And that, I think last year we generated like $1.6 million in sales tax revenue. And so $500,000 of that went to the state and did not stay here in Brattleboro. And so I was making the case that to the Senate committee that wouldn't it be appropriate for towns that host the GA program to have that sales tax money stay in the town to help us with the emergency response. They were very sympathetic. They understood what I was saying, but they passed the bill out of their committee with only a 5% increase. So if that passes, it would be a 75% to 25% split. And the reason they said that they did that was to preserve the pilot payment program for the state. And that means that $500,000 that our sales tax contributes to the state, that money goes to towns throughout the state to pay for payments in lieu of taxes for state buildings that are in those towns, in the towns across the state. So like we do get some amount of that for state buildings that are in Brattleboro, but it's not $500,000, it's considerably less. A point that I made to the committee was, boy, it's really not fair because not only does the GA motel program use vouchers so we don't get the rooms and meals tax on those overnight stays, but because you're renting private property for this purpose, we don't get any pilot payment for the use of facilities in our town that are generating costs to the municipality. But they didn't buy that was a pilot opportunity for us or for the 13 towns that have both the local option tax and the GA program in their towns. I also testified on another bill, H91, where there's been some discussion there. It's of having some municipality support for kind of the support services that are needed for the state's GA program or whatever replaces it. And I think they had around $3 million in the budget statewide to support municipalities. Last I heard, that got whittled down to $1 million. I don't know if that will survive or not, but we requested that along with 4 other towns, that be considered when they do that legislation. So those are the things that we've been working on to try to generate more state support for state programs that are impacting our town.
Go ahead.
So you're saying that 30% of that 1% local option that we voted to help keep our taxes down is being used by the state to pay their taxes to other towns?
Yes, that's correct.
Boy, I sure wish they told us that when we were debating that one.
Fritz.
Fritz Bright, District 9. I have 3 questions. One is, well, it looks like there is an equivalent increase in the Parks and Recs Department budget, which hasn't been mentioned here tonight, despite all the detail on all the other departments. It looks like that increase is about 5%, or equivalent to about what got cut from the sustainability coordinator position. It is my understanding that if we cut the sustainability coordinator position in half, we will effectively lose our sustainability coordinator, at which point we will lose the reported benefits of that position, which, according to the town manager's reporting recently, is that that position is more than paying for itself in terms of bringing money into the town.
Fritz, don't slip into advocacy. That's not the purpose of this meeting. Ask your question.
I am referencing facts that have been reported by the town and are in various documents that have been published.
So what's your question?
The question for the board is, why would you be increasing Parks and Recs by a significant amount and eliminating effectively a position that is saving the town significant money? And I also have a question about health insurance, which I am hoping is going to be on your agenda for this next year, as well as garbage, as things that we could bring in-house. So for the moment, for this budget, let's discuss the Recreation Department and the Sustainability Coordinator and how those two are impacting our budget.
Thank you.
I can address that. So the increase in the Rec and Parks Department is 3.9%, or a total of $38,681. The reduction, the savings on reducing the sustainability coordinator to part-time is $43,035. About the same, you're right, it's a little bit more on savings on the sustainability coordinator. The Rec and Parks increase is sort of a standard increase in that department. It's based on a lot of different pieces that revolve around what it takes to operate all the parks and provide all the recreation programs and the senior programs that that department does. The board had an extensive conversation about they reviewed services in all of the departments and tried to find ones that they could agree on that we could reduce. And the one that stuck really was reducing our community resilience work. And when they asked us to come back with, like, what would that mean? That would mean taking a position down to part-time. So we wouldn't need as many hours to provide that work. So that's why that reduction was suggested. So.
Could you please address the grant that have been coming in and the savings that we will be getting long term? If we are losing income and grant money in the process, calling it a savings is disingenuous.
Yes. Yeah, so the remaining hours in that FTE is for the grant work and the development of those types of opportunities. And so theoretically that will still be provided. What won't be provided is a lot of the community resilience support. So for community organizations, helping them with energy savings and things like that. That was what was reduced, not necessarily the grant writing or anything like that.
Okay, you did not address the fact that we were going to lose our sustainability coordinator if we cut it to halftime. And you also, you bring up the benefits to the non-governmental parts of the town. Those are savings or benefits to the town as well that have both a community and a financial aspect to them. So it seems like we're not really looking at that very clear-eyed.
Okay, so just let me say in a broad brush here that what RTM charged the select board in doing is cutting the budget. And many opinions in the RTM were disappointment that the previous budget did not address staff cuts. And so we took a long, careful look at the services and the related staff cuts that might be appropriate. And it's important to realize that once the select board had staff cuts to make, as requested by the town, it was a very difficult process. And I think what you're seeing in the reduction of the sustainability coordinator to a half-time position is a compromise between the need to cut staff and the need to provide the service. What also entered into our conversation at the select board was the fact that in the current government climate at the federal level, there would be very few sustainability grants awarded. And so while some grants for water quality and infrastructure will still be able to be sought, the other more traditional sustainability grants will not be available. And I think we all need to understand that what our mission was to cut staff, to examine that process, and we did. And every position is a struggle because we value our staff. John?
And I would just add to what you said, Liz, that because of the potential opportunity to do more, to find more sustainability money in the water and utility side, one thing that we are looking into is whether the other piece of that position could be supported in the utility budget. We don't know the answer to that yet, but because the board will be considering the utility budget later in June. But that is one possibility. I can't guarantee it, but if that pencils out and we actually could use more support for writing grants on the utility side, that could potentially address Frick's concern. And the other thing I wanted to just mention was that it's not a half-time position, it's 25 hours, which is more than half-time.
Thank you. And the other two items that you mentioned about health insurance and garbage, yes, we will be looking at both to try and find whatever savings and economies we can in the next year. Yes.
Can I just speak to? Yeah, so I just, for context, if you've been reading the news, the city of Burlington eliminated 25 positions from their city government. And some of them were unfilled, I think like 7 or so. And so 18, including union employees, were let go. It's a different climate, and it's hard right now. And these are hard decisions to make. And I'm sorry that we had to make that decision, but I hope that you'll support a half-time position as opposed to a full-time. Thank you.
Kevin O'Brien, District 9. Sticking on the Sustainability Coordinator position, just some money questions. I'm on page 21, and the line item says reduction of $25,370. And then on page 7, it says reduce Sustainability Coordinator hours, and that's cost savings of $43,035. So to have the sustainability coordinator position at full-time, would the budget need to be increased by $43,035?
John, I'll let you handle
Yeah.
those tricky questions.
Yep. I think it's $43,035. Yeah. I think that's the answer to your question.
Okay, so that 23,000 does not include the healthcare benefits, et cetera.
Where's the,
On page 21, kind of towards the bottom.
yeah. So that's just the salary amount, the 23,000. There's benefits that are in other lines throughout the budget, and that would be a total of $43,035. Yep.
Perfect, thank you.
George?
I'm stiff. Thank you, George Carville, District 7. Just a nuts and bolts question. On page 8, you say reducing the dispatcher position to part-time. Since I assume we're not going to leave the phone unanswered half the day, what is the plan, and is that going to give us a risk of overtime in some other area?
Thank
Yeah.
you, George.
Yes, so we have 10 dispatchers to cover all the shifts. This is one of those positions going to part-time. This was in order for the police department to kind of bring in their share of reductions. They suggested this. They don't love it. We think it may have an impact on overtime. That's going to depend a lot on like sort of what happens in people's lives who are in the other 9 positions. It is concerning, but it was the way we could find some reductions, and the department is willing to try it.
There was someone over there. Yes, Rachel.
Rachel Dissler, District 9. I have 2 questions. They're not connected to each other, so I can ask them separately if needed. The first, one of the things you cited in pathways being explored for generating more revenue is looking at an additional tax on second home properties or short-term rentals. And I'm curious, based on what you said earlier about the local option tax split between the town and the state, would the funds generated from such a tax on short-term rentals or second homes, would those funds generated through that, if the town were to pass it, stay in Brattleboro, or would that get split similarly?
As to the short-term rental, I think that's a discussion that needs to be had with the legislature, our legislators, and then the Vermont State Legislature for the taxing authority giving that to a town. So So I think there are some legal problems with that, but it's a topic to be looking at to try to generate revenue. With regard to the 1%, that deals more with what John spoke about with regard to that house, I forget the number, Bill.
Would that hold true for a tax on second homes, not just short-term rentals, but second home properties?
Well, second home, it depends on what type of tax you're talking about, because second homes are taxed through the real property tax. But if you're talking some additional tax on that, that again is a state legislature imposed tax. So again, those are conversations to have more on the state level that could possibly generate revenue back to the town.
Okay. My second question is, there is a line item on page 21. The computer equipment maintenance. It looks like from the rejected budget to the new budget that increased $90,000 due to the lack of an IT coordinator. I'm curious if you can just sort of elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. So we put in that as an estimate, 90,000. We have not tried to procure those services yet, or even got an estimate or anything on it. We think somewhere in that ballpark will allow us to have additional coverage from our computer services contractor that supports a lot of what happens in the town. The conversation that we had previously, I think 2 years ago, was about an IT coordinator position that would be actually on staff and better positioned to advance the strategic needs of the town with respect to information technology. And at that time, it was, a discussion about whether we try to use contracted services, outsource it, or whether we try to have that better coverage by an internal. We never filled that position, mainly because of stresses on the budget. That was a vacancy that we froze, and we just held it for 2 years, which is ridiculous, but we just had no way to cover our budget without holding that position. So this is to try it another way. What we're understanding is that we have some significant vulnerabilities as town in IT. I've never worked in an organization of the size of the town of Brattleboro that doesn't have 3 or 4 IT people, so it's amazing what we do on a shoestring here. I don't think we're like at imminent risk, but I'm learning and understanding things that certainly kind of keep me up at night a little bit about how we could be infiltrated and actually lose significant money because we're not well protected. So that's our biggest fear around that, but then we also have a lot of really routine information technology needs that are not getting covered very professionally or very well. And so that's, again, what this contracted services would help us do better.
Rachel, just wait.
Sorry, I should have just stayed standing. Would it actually save the town more money to just have that IT coordinator? Or would we still, are there other costs that would be associated with that coordinator that are not shown in that line item, but elsewhere, that makes it a savings to go with a contractor even at that estimated contract amount?
Yes, I think I understand your question. So I think the savings we're projecting is around $4,000 or $5,000 over what hiring the IT coordinator would be. But I gotta reemphasize that I don't know if that 90,000 is the right number or not. It may be lower, so it may be more of a savings, but it may not be enough to. It really is going to depend on what our procurement reveals.
Thank you.
Michael Bosworth, District 7. A question on one of the ideas for revenues, which I believe I've heard before, possible sale of town land assets. So, sort of to give myself a little better sense that this might happen this coming year, what would be the process? Is that going to be assigned to a particular department? I assume it's going to be easy enough to get a list of those assets, but from there, what would happen to make that a reality?
Thank you, Michael. A certain amount of that work has been done. John, you want to explain?
Yes. So our planning department has taken a look at all of the potentially available land parcels that the town owns. The purpose of that assessment was really from a housing planning perspective. So the idea was, are there some parcels of town land that we could make available to a developer to build housing, and then get that land off of, get it back onto the tax rolls and generate grand list value. There would also be direct revenues from the sale of that real property. So we would benefit kind of in two ways. I don't know if we have an update on where that project is, but it is definitely capacity constrained to move that forward. But if it becomes a priority of this board, we certainly would put resources towards that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Andy?
Andy Davis, District 9. I wanted to go back to the local option tax, because that was very interesting, and I'm glad you pursued that. I just looked online back at the 2018 annual report. It was 2018 that we voted to do that, and I believe it was a multi-year, painful discussion that was resisted for years. There was never any mention of the pilot program. It was sold that the state would take about 30-some% of it for an administrative fee. My question is, when did it go from being an administrative fee, which we all thought was excessive, to running another state program, or do I not want to know?
You know, that's such a good question. You know, I voted for the 1% tax, and we were told it was administrative costs. And it's really a question for our legislators when that change occurred. But I remember years ago, you know, Mr. DeGray, as chair, was advocating for the 1% tax, and it evolved. And one of the main benefits, a little bit of aside from your question, but one of the main benefits is online sales. That's really made the difference in the revenue that we receive. But as far as, you know, the 30%, it's been 30%. They've changed the name of it. I don't think we ever looked closely enough to what they were doing with that 30%. I mean, we just assumed it was accountants, you know, bean counters taking that money, but now we understand much better the various things that they're doing with our money. When our legislators came to the select board, we asked them about that. One of the things that they mentioned was that they would be providing revenue for flood-impacted communities. So there's a variety of things that they have in mind with our 30%. And as John pointed out, the best that we could do was eke out another 5% from that. So we can ask our legislators when that transition happened, when their naming transition happened, and when they chose to do these specific things that they're choosing to do with are 30%, now 25%.
When I first went on,
From the statute, looking at that, it looks like those changes were made by the legislature in 2023. So relatively recently and not at the time of the 2018.
Hi, Jenna Seymour, District 8. I have 3 sets of questions. The first 2 should be pretty easy. First, if I could direct your attention to page 17 under revenues. And this is in comparison to the table on page 8 listing new revenues. I see that the fire outside revenue of $10,000, which is in the page 8 table, has been restored from the previous proposed budget. But on the page 8 table, it does not list the $50,000 that was restored to the new proposed budget, which is a $40,000 increase over FY25. And could you please explain what those are and how we expect to receive that money?
I'm a little lost. I see the $10,000.
Yeah, at the bottom of page 17 is police outside revenue of $50,000.
Oh.
It's not in the table on page 8.
Yes, so this is not really revenue, it's kind of a pass-through. So different organizations, businesses will hire the police department for like traffic control or things like that. It's not when they're on shift or when they're on duty. It's basically when they're off duty, they get hired on to do that. So this comes in as like they pay us for that, but it just covers the cost, which is expended on the salary side. So it's not really additional revenue. It's just we think that there's going to be more of that, and it covers that cost.
And that $50,000, how does that impact the number that we're being given on page 8 in the table, which is $89,000? I think it was.
Oh yeah, so yeah, that wasn't really like a policy. I didn't include it here because it wasn't really a policy decision.
Okay.
It's just another kind of adjustment that we think is reasonable.
The second thing, if I could draw your attention to page 24, or just reference it. In the previous in the May 1st proposal of the budget, there was, I believe it was a $30,000 reduction in the library for heating fuel costs and for electricity. That seems to have been restored to the budget, but we haven't gotten any explanation of that.
The heating, fuel, and electric, all those remain the same in the library budget from what was in March.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And finally, my big question, on page 6, the first thing listed is that all staff salaries have been held to a cost of living increase of only 3%. But if I could reference page 19, page 24, page 26, and page 27, we have the department head salaries increasing by the town manager on page 19, 9.2%, human resources, 7.6%. On page 24, fire department, 8.7%. Page 26, police department, 12.2%. And page 27, public works department, 7.1%. Now, I understand that there is a partial explanation on those pages of non-base salary shifted to this line. And there is a number associated with that in each case. However, the actual full change over the fiscal year 25 budget is much larger than that. And I'd like a better explanation of exactly what's going on there and why, if we are being told that staff salaries are being held to 3%, these specific positions are not being held to that standard.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. Yeah, so it was for the reasons that I explained earlier in my statement before for you, and that is things got moved around in the budget so that we are better positioned to understand what the Social Security and retirement benefits should come out of staff salary lines. So for example, like in my salary, the select board in my contract has a $5,000 transportation cost, so that they don't provide me a vehicle, they provide me $5,000. Well, that was in a different line, and we were taking Social Security and retirement out of that, but it wasn't budgeted right, and part of the reason for that was because it wasn't in the staff salary line. So now that's been corrected in all those cases, or where department head gets paid because they're not in the, they don't take our health insurance. There's an extra payment that goes to an employee that is less than what it would cost us to pay them health insurance. So it's like an incentive to not have the health insurance benefit. That's like another example of non-base salary that got moved in some of them into the staff salary line. So it looks like it goes up more than the 3%, but it's actually just a reallocation in the budget. And then the final thing I would mention on that is that there's also the step increases, even though those were reduced by 1% across the board on non-union positions. There is still some steps for some department head salaries because they haven't reached the top of the ladder in the step system. The other ones who are at the top of the step, you'll see are just 3% increases, and that's the COLA.
But if I could, just as an example, and I'm sorry to use you, but you know, the change from RTM1 to RTM2 in this budget is $3,124, and you're saying that there's like a $5,000 cost that was moved into this line. And I'm trying to understand where that is reflected, because none of it's itemized.
Yeah, it was probably a different estimate on some part of the salary that I may not understand.
Okay.
But when that got put back in, it like reduced some and increased some.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just the last thing that I have to say on that point is that referring back to the budget priorities, and that item that said that, you know, some of the department head salaries might not actually have been competitive with other towns. Who is making that determination?
So we do an assessment. We work with VLCT, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. They keep track of different what different positions are paid across the state. Ours tend to be kind of right in the middle, not the highest, not the lowest, but competitive. We are in a challenging situation because really, like a lot of our the competition for our staff is in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, which are nearby to Brattleboro. So like, for example, we have been trying to hire a finance director, and the starting salary there, so this the lowest rung of the step system, would hire in a finance director at $95,000. We've not been able to attract anyone that is qualified to do that, and that's why we ended up recommending outsourcing those services, because we were, well, one, we were sort of desperate. We needed some help on the municipal finance side, and so, and that's been about a wash. So in that case, outsourcing is, you know, hopefully going to be about the same as what we would have paid that $95,000 plus benefits. But that's the real challenge for us. If we don't maintain competitive salaries at that level, when people leave, we can't fill the positions, and then we're stuck with a Hobson's choice of outsourcing or not, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I run my own IT consultancy for over a decade, so I'm, you know, aware of those issues. I just really wanted that question answered of, you know, how is the determination being made of what constitutes a competitive salary?
Yes, and we did propose, I think it was in the last budget cycle, to do a comp study you basically hire a firm to come in and do what VLCT kind of does pretty well, but it isn't necessarily focused on Brattleboro, like our region. And we ended up, I think, cutting that because we couldn't afford it. But that would be, we really wanted to do that before we went into collective bargaining, so that we had some information, better information to bargain with, and would have done all of the salaries at that point. But now we'll have to just rely on the statewide data and do the best we can. So.
Thank you.
Arthur?
Hi there, Arthur Davis, District 8. Two questions. First one I think is probably pretty quick. So the assistant town manager position, obviously a big savings this year if we don't hire that position. Is that envisioned as a long-term solution? Because obviously if in a future year we do hire that position back, then it goes up by a bunch. So just curious what the thinking has been, either both in the town manager's office and the select board so far.
Let me start by saying that we've been looking at the finance director and the assistant town manager's salaries as a set. Because some of the duties of the assistant town manager were financial. So if we have a outside consultant who has, by the way, the benefit of being our auditor for many years and very familiar with our budget, that is a piece of the assistant town manager's salary. But I think I'll let John speak to the fact that this will be difficult, and we all have to bear with it. John?
Yeah, I'm just reaching out for support to the other department heads. I'm leaning on Department of Public Works quite a bit at the moment, and it really kind of depends on how that all plays out. I think we'll learn a lot by doing this over the course of the next year, and then around probably budget time. Later this year, we'll want to make a call about whether to continue or whether to try to restore that. We're trying to find savings, and that's why we're gonna have to try some stuff like this and see how badly I do without support.
Thanks both of you for the answer. I guess the other question is, John, you touched on this earlier. This is kind of going back to the sustainability coordinator situation. The utility fund idea, obviously RTM has no jurisdiction over that. That's a select board thing. But I'm just curious what that would look like kind of structurally if the utility fund could support part of that position. And you kind of said you don't know if that's a possibility, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So we're still exploring that and how that could potentially work. The select board talked about the rate study last night, the utility rate study. It's really going to depend on what that budget looks like as to whether the utility feels like they could either support that or not. Then, like managerially or operationally, we'll have to figure out how that plays. It's a little complicated. We do have positions that are split between the utility and the general fund currently, and it works pretty well. It's there are definitely complexities to it, but I think we could figure that operational part out if the utility can afford it. So.
Cool. No, that's great. And then I guess just a final question also on this same subject. I remember there had been discussion at one of the meetings, I can't remember which one, and I wasn't there in person, but about, it was kind of, I guess this is kind of about both the previous questions, the sustainability coordinator position and the assistant town manager position also having some kind of merger thing, which it sounds like you were also thinking about the finance director and kind of, anyway, I'm just curious where that ended up. I don't quite remember.
It was an idea that was floated. it's a much more logical merger between finance and the town manager.
That's where that discussion ended up, it sounds like. Great, thank you, thank you.
Welcome. There's a person behind Mr. Smith. Is that Tony? Okay.
There are two things that I was looking at in here, and one of them is probably a stupid question. But, I'm glad that you didn't hear about it being a stupid question. In the taxpayer impacts in terms of assessed property value, it lists 4 different levels of, of property tax. Do we have any possibility of adding another level? Or is that a state thing? Or, could there, so there's like, 90,000, 183,000.
Oh, no.
It's on page 12.
Those are just values of homes.
Oh, okay.
For our general edification.
Right, so I told you it was a stupid question, so.
Well, there you go.
The other thing is about the pilot. So I've strongly advocated for NECA getting the tax exempt property status, and I'm still support that, but there's so much nonprofit, there's so much property and organizations that aren't, providing tax. What is there, I'm actually encouraging NECA to try and figure out, even though they're not making a lot of money, to see if they can do the pilot. Is there any incentive or any is there anything about the pilot program that can be done that would cause there to be more money from that?
Let's start by having a conversation about civic duty and well-meaning, and then I'll ask John to answer the question.
Yeah, so this has been a goal of the assessor's office for some time, and the assessor's office has been working on requesting payments in lieu of taxes for tax-exempt properties. And one of the things that this board discussed when we were talking about revenues was, could we step that up a bit? And that's why it was listed in as a possibility that we would move forward within in this fiscal year. There's nothing that compels a nonprofit to participate, but other than being a good citizen. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We will likely put in some more resources to making those asks. So.
Is that Millicent?
Millicent Cooley, District 9. This is a question about the bus service. So it looks like on page 7, it was reduced by 25,000. Page 8 was 25,000 was put back in. So I'm just curious about where this leaves us with the services the bus service that we're giving. So there's routes around town. Are all those routes still going to be in place? And then there's microtransit service that had been added maybe a year ago. I actually volunteer teaching people how to use those services. But so I'm just wondering, is there going to be any change to any of those services?
So we've restored the $50,000 that we generally give to the bus service, but the bus service themselves have made some modifications. John, do you know what they are?
Yeah. So the SEVT that runs the mover gets a lot of state and federal funding, and that's a little bit all up in the air. So we don't know, we don't really know what the service might look like next fiscal year, because that's a bigger piece of their revenues than our measly $50,000 really base. It's like millions that they get there. So it's a little hard to answer your question, because we don't know kind of their side of things and what revenue. I'm not sure they even do know at this point. What we do know is that typically the town has provided local match funding to them of $50,000. They did come to us earlier this year and asked for a $5,000 increase, and we pretty much said that's probably not in the cards this year. That would have been before what we don't know about the state and federal funding. That would have been to sustain the current service that we're all, familiar with on the blue line, the white line, and the red line. Then they have this other program, which was funded by the town last year through the Human Services grants to do the micro transit. I think that was $30,000 or $40,000. Don't quote me, but it's in that ballpark. They were looking to get that renewed again, but the Human Services Committee did not do a grant to them this year, so that was not in what you voted on in March. So that was cut, unless they can raise that funding somewhere, it's through a grant or something, it won't happen. So,
Okay, understood. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yes.
Sonia Silbert, District 9. I have two questions. One is about the leaf collection still being cut. What is the thought that will happen to all of our leaves? Like, is that something that then the trash folks would take and put into the landfill, or what is the thought on that?
Well, my personal thought on that is compost them.
I do that, and I see a lot of leaves out there that other people are leaving out there. So, like, what is the thought that will happen with the lots of folks who do put their bags out?
Yeah, so, it's part of the wider discussion on trash removal and composting and recycling. And, we had this year-long study, and we asked the public what they needed, and there was overwhelming support for composting and recycling. And so we're looking for savings somewhere within that. And leaf collection seemed like an easy fit because a lot of people think that there's an environmental benefit to not raking out all your leaves and putting your leaves, back underneath your shrubs and that sort of thing. So from a sustainability perspective and from a cost-cutting perspective, those are the types of discussions that went into that decision. John, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, that's really it. It was going to be covered under the Casella contract, and that was the concession that they gave us, was $20,000 to cut those two pickups during the year. Spring and
So
fall.
people who do put their leaves out, like, they can't put that into a garbage bag and have that picked up by Casella, or what are you expecting to happen?
I think it's one of those personal responsibility things, that if you have a neighbor who has a truck, and you get your neighbors together and they take that truck to Wyndham Solid Waste, and it can be made into compost that Wyndham Solid Waste sells, and, or you have a friend who has a farm and you want to bring them out to their compost pile, or it's a personal responsibility thing at this point because we made that budget savings. And we are a great community of networkers, so I firmly believe that somebody's going to fill in the vacuum there. Or, I'm not going to volunteer myself, but I could, whatever. But yeah, it's personal responsibility, network.
I just see a lot of bags. I take some bags from other people's yards for our compost.
Well,
but
you know what? That's a start. I use the leaves, to cover my garlic.
Me too. I got you. Just saying, I think people who don't do that already are not going to do that.
Well, I think, a broader education program and a broader understanding of the value of formerly raked leaves might be in order for the community as a whole, because we need that $20,000.
But that's not something that you all are planning on doing.
Oscar, did you want to comment?
Yes. I think this is, no, we have not discussed any plans for a community education campaign or anything like that. I think this is just a pretty focused, sort of poignant example of what a budget cut means. It's a service that would be much better to have than not. And, you know, we made the decision, as with a lot of other things, that we were going to try to live without this one. And so people who used to rely on that will now have to find another solution, which is a little worse for them. And in exchange, we saved $20,000 in the budget. And was that the right trade-off? That's a really hard question to answer, but.
Yeah, I think my real question was like, will Casella pick that up as trash now?
No.
No, yeah.
Although,
What if you put it in the wheelie bin?
I assume if you put leaves in a trash bag, nobody will know and they will take it. There's probably
Okay, all
better
right,
things
let's
to
calm
do.
down, let's calm down.
I don't think it's illegal to put leaves in a trash
Probably
bag.
not.
I wouldn't want to sit up here and advocate that. It's not in line with the sustainability concepts that this town has adopted. And you know, we need to, you know, we were a leader in this state with pay-as-you-throw. And we have, you know, our survey indicated that there were great regard for reducing waste and for composting and for recycling. And this is of a set. And when, you know, the other thing that the previous select board studied very hard was the equity associated with universal trash collection. And so some of the alternatives to trash collection was, you know, every person for themselves going to the dump. And I have great problems with that. And so the compromise that was made to reduce leaf collection is, I think, doable for this community that's as civic-minded and sustainability-minded as it is, to, as Amanda said, you know, find individual solutions to your individual leaf conditions. Anyone else? Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I live on a route where I can do it, and I just choose to mow over them. I mean, that's my concession. I just mow them, mulch them, leave them right where they are, and get the benefit of that in the following year.
Yeah, just
No, Casella will not pick up your leaves.
great. I don't put my leaves out. I'm just feeling like, just want to name that, just trying to figure out like what the thought is, because I think it would be great if there was a little bit of a like, hey, Conservation Commission, will you take that? I don't know, like, will somebody else pick that up? So just wanting to get clarity that that wasn't just going to get roped into trash.
Well, I'll tell you this.
I thought that was my easy question.
We're not going to publicize trash pickup, so there won't be the bags on the side of people's homes because there will be no collection. And I bet you Seth here will put in his newsletter at the appropriate time various ideas for people to deal with their leaves.
Okay, great, thanks. Sorry, that was way more complicated than I thought. My other question was just a follow-up about the department head range and the 3% versus the combo. I understand that the 3% cost of living adjustment was for union staff, and department heads have different contracts, right? Right, Tafar? Can you tell us, of those department heads who had increases in the budget of more than 3%, how much of it was actually salary increases? Like what percentage did those, I think there were like 5 folks that just got mentioned, there were like 7 to 12% increases. Like what percent increased salaries are the department heads getting?
It depends. So kind of like I was describing before, they're all have the 3%. The ones that are still in the steps, I think it's 3% steps. So those are people that are still working up to the market rate because they were hired in lower. And then it's other things like a non-salary benefits that were elsewhere in the budget and got moved into those lines.
Right, I understand that part. So you're saying every department head gets their 3% increase the way all staff does, plus an additional 3% until they hit a certain number?
Yes, correct, yep.
And each department head has a different cap?
Yeah, it depends on the role. Yeah, each job is classified a certain way for level of responsibility, and it has a starting salary, and that goes up through the steps to the kind of the competitive range. So.
And does that mean that the most of these numbers that we're seeing that have like 10 and 12% increases, actually the most that is a staff salary increase is only 6%?
That's correct, yeah.
And when you said it's a 1% decrease, was it 1% of that 6%, or was it originally going to be 7%?
It was so the steps were at 4%, they're now at 3%.
Okay, great. So it would have been, they would have gotten 7%. This year they got 6%.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Can I?
And yeah, go ahead.
So just to, if this was something that we had questions about as a board too and followed up on, so maybe generally this can be helpful. What we, I think, were given to understand is that if you look at the three FY25, FY26 RTM1 and RTM2, none of the changes between RTM1 and RTM2 for department head salaries are actual increases in somebody's salary. So all of those increases in salaries are captured in the original budget. Everything after that was something getting moved or some slight up or down adjustment being found.
And while Seth is standing here bringing these microphones, I just wanted to mention the excellent job that Seth Thomas does as our communications coordinator. He's the one who provides the newsletters that we all receive about goings-on about town, and it's really important, and I think it's really useful. And I just want to mention that before I volunteer him to discuss leaf collection. Yes.
And just one addition on that front is that, Patrick used to do this. Patrick used to staff, run the table and Zoom at select board meetings. Now Seth is doing that. So that's an example of how some of those duties are being spread out across other people, and we're really thankful for that.
Dr. Tortolani.
Thank you, Bob Tortolani, District 8. First of all, I want to thank all of you for your hard work and the process in which you looked at the budget that we sent back to you. And I was really happy to hear that you think it's been useful and it's going to help you as you go forward. So that's all great. In terms of ways to try to increase the amount of money coming into the town, Peter, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I'd love to see more businesses, more ways that we could, increase our tax base. But I'd like to just resurrect something that Chris Chapman mentioned 2 or 3 years ago at a town meeting. It had to do with looking at our town as a possible place to donate. When you look at various organizations that you care about and that need help, you can make tax-deductible donations, and that is really wonderful. It's very important, but I don't know if one could look at our community that we care about a lot and that needs a lot of help as a way to donate if we thought that would be something, a viable choice among the many things that we donate to. But I don't know if there's a tax. It can be done with a tax advantage to the donation as you can with most organizations. That's my question. Thank you.
What an excellent question. We will definitely look into that.
Yep.
And I hope everyone hears that question. Thank you. Next. Bob.
Thank you. Bob Ozer, District 9. So 2 totally unrelated questions. One is we're talking, a couple of people have been talking, I guess, about department head salaries and the fact that non-base benefit monies were transferred to the salaries, which now look like they're an increase in salary, but they're not. And I think they come, and maybe I'm wrong on this, and maybe you can correct me, but that would probably come from the benefits section. So looking at page 22, there's a number of benefits that are listed. And the increases in benefits are from, or one would assume that the salary increases at the department head level would have a corresponding decrease in the benefit lines. But the benefit lines seem to increase from 20% to 44%. And there's a notation that says that the OpenGov projections are more accurate than the other fiscal year budget estimates. So my first question is whether you could explain that or unpack that a little bit. And then should I do my second question, or I'll hold?
I think we'll answer this one and then go on to the next.
Okay.
Oscar, did you have a comment?
No, just an example of one potential answer. I think most of those adjustments are not from benefits, but for example, if you look at town manager, there is $4,500 coming out of transportation. That was moved into the salary line item. So most of those that say something about non-base salary shifted to this line, I think you will find a different line item somewhere, like some small line item somewhere that was zeroed out. I don't know, do any of them come from benefits?
I don't know. I don't think so, though. I think you're right, Oscar. They're all within those departments, mainly things that got moved around within those. So look at each of those areas, and that should hopefully explain it. There were also adjustments in the salary lines for things like now that OpenGov lets us know for each employee when their step happens that we might have been overestimating or underestimating because we just did it as a snapshot in, say, September or whenever we pulled that last time. Now we can actually plug in the actual month, and that may have reduced some of those as well.
Okay, so I'm looking in the wrong section. The other question I'm actually stealing from somebody else who asked me the question today, so I haven't heard it yet, so I'll try. H91 transfers the DCF voucher program to the hotels, or if passed, would transfer that program to the community action agencies. And then they would figure out a way to obtain hotel rooms. So the question was whether, if that happens, if that gets passed, do the hotels then pay room and meals tax to the town, since they're not now being paid directly from the state? Or will it still be a voucher program? And that may be an unfair question because the bill hasn't passed yet. And also that it may depend upon what the payment structure is going to be for that. So I figured I wouldn't do the homework, but I'd ask the question.
Thank you, Bob. John?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I think that's still very much in flux, but the general idea of H91 is about a year of kind of figuring out how all those things will happen. I've been told that municipalities will have an opportunity to participate in some way in that. So, that would be a good thing for municipalities to be raising as a concern.
Have we answered everyone's questions? Well, that's just remarkable. Let's give ourselves a hand. If there isn't anything further, I'll bid you good night and hope to see you all Tuesday evening. And Tuesday evening, it's at the high school auditorium at 6:30?
Yes.
At 6:30. See you then. Thank you very much.
Is it the auditorium or the
Wait,
gymnasium?
we have one more question. Bethany?
Hi, this is, sorry, well, that's really loud. I'm Bethany. This is in no way related to the budget. The custodians who work at Academy School are staying late for this, so A, if you see one, say thank you. And B, if anybody happens to have a couple minutes and wants to stay around and help me fold up some chairs to help them get out of here a little sooner, this is a massive amount of extra work for them, and they're already mopping all the floors. So I'm gonna be here, so is my kid. If anybody has a couple minutes and wants to help, I'm sure that Marvin, Ed, Antonio, Ray would all really super appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.